Hi, my name is Lynette Avila. My group members are Berto Serrano and Nancy Phillip, and we are going to be doing a presentation on the horseshoe theory. So, to start off, what is the horseshoe theory? So, the horseshoe theory is an observation originally created by Jean-Pierre Faye through this observation was created through observing Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union's joint invasion of Poland. So, through this observation, he came up with a theory which states that the political spectrum is not a straight line, but it is rather a horseshoe shape. So, being in a horseshoe shape means that rather than being complete opposites, the far left and the far right are at different ends of the horseshoe and are actually closer to each other than further away that people tend to think. So, the left side of the horseshoe is going to include far left ideologies and left ideologies, including communism and socialism. So the center is just the political center, which is going to be the more moderate ideologies. And then the right side of the horseshoe is going to be far right and right leaning ideologies such as fascism and conservatism. So the extreme right side of the horseshoe tends to involve fascism, which is an extreme right ideology that focuses on a strong central state, essentially meaning that the population must work for a collective good. So, this right side of the horseshoe tends to justify discrimination against women, people of color, and the LGBT community. The extreme right side of the horseshoe also tends to demonize non-white people. This is because they believe that it is hard for white people to succeed because affirmative action allows for minorities to be able to succeed at white people's expense. So, because of this, they tend to believe that it is okay to take away certain people's rights for their own advantage. Other key aspects of the extreme right side of the horseshoe include privatizing state functions and abolishing government agencies.
So, some ideology of the extreme left is that they are, in an economic sense, extremely anti-capitalist. They often advocate for socialism or communism and just a system where wealth and power are redistributed in a system to achieve economic equality for all people. Um, the extreme left also seeks abolition of all forms of hierarchical authority, including the state. So they often believe that people can self organize and cooperate in a decentralized community. The extreme left also tends to be against the military and extremely anti colonialism. They oppose all forms of imperialism and foreign intervention and usually will support human rights. How the extreme left and the extreme right are similar, which is essentially the horseshoe theory, is that they're both anti establishment. So the extreme right sees an attack on national identity, and that causes damage to the establishment. Whereas the left can only see the establishment based on inequality towards people and capitalist exploitation of workers. They both tend to lean towards looking for state power as a means for their ends. So, for the extreme right, they support strong national security, closed borders, all of that, and just traditional values. And for the extreme left, they seek control of the economy or society to impose their visions of equality. And they both tend to be following very polarizing rhetoric to pull people in and pull voters in.
Hi guys, my name is Berto Serrano, and today I will be presenting examples of the horseshoe theory in American politics. So, to start off, I did want to present two notable examples. Those involve the topic of Israel and Gaza, as well as the topic of the ongoing war in Ukraine and Russia. So to start off with the topic of Israel and Gaza, so I did kind of want to point out a notable House vote that occurred in April of 2024. So we had members of the two political parties, the Democratic and the Republican parties, political extremes. So we have the Democratic parties, more left wing flank, alongside the GOP's more, MAGA populist right wing flank. They both voted similarly in opposing almost $27 billion in military aid towards the state of Israel. So I found it to be kind of interesting because we had the two extremes, or so-called extremes of the two parties kind of unite in a sense to oppose this aid. The GOP's more extremist flank kind of use their populist rhetoric to oppose that, and the Democratic Party's more left-wing flank, the progressives, use it more of as a sign of being anti-war. I did also kind of include two pictures of the two groups. So on the left here we have Lauren Boebert, who is a vocal member of the GOP's, like right-wing MAGA flank, and we also have Rashida Tlaib. She is a member of the Democratic Party's more progressive leftist flank, or Democratic Socialist. So I did find that kind of notable and interesting as an example of the horseshoe theory in action. We also have the topic of Ukraine and Russia. So for this one, it was kind of funny because we did also have a member of, the GOP's more right-wing flank. Her name is Marguerite Taylor Greene, for those who are not familiar with her. She protested actually alongside a leftist group in demanding for an end to the war in Ukraine. And I also include a picture of that kind of whole protest. And one of the signs even says Ukraine is not the 51st state. That is often a line also repeated by many in the far right, who kind of take a more isolationist approach towards the whole war in Ukraine. And so this is a moment where we had, a far left group and a member of the far right, again, find themselves ideologically closer in this topic specifically. So I found that quite interesting, actually. Now to move on to our conclusion and recap. So what we've seen here, that's the presentation, is that we have these two groups kind of find themselves similar in their root in branded populism. So what I mean by that is we kind of have this anti-establishment, anti-elite rhetoric uniting the two groups, in their fight for the little man. That kind of unites them. Their distrust of elites. It kind of fuels an anger towards these elite corporations in their eyes, these elite population, these establishment groups, and the whole us versus them rhetoric. And the us versus them rhetoric was it was very important in the phenomena of the Bernie Trump voter. So for those who don't know who the Bernie Trump voter is, it was this kind of phenomenon that occurred in 2016, 2020, where we had, somebody who was probably progressive, a left-wing populist who voted for Bernie Sanders in the Democratic primaries. However, when it came to the general election, they might have voted for Donald Trump. So why might have this person voted for Donald Trump instead of, the more centrist options, the more liberal options, which were, at that time, Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton. So many people do blame the horseshoe theory for that kind of occurrence, because that Bernie voter might have find themselves to be closer in a sense to Donald Trump than that more establishment, I guess more moderate Clinton or Biden. So I found that to be quite interesting. And actually I saw that it could have been as high as 20% of Bernie's primary voters did actually end up voting for Donald Trump. So again, that was probably a very, notable example of horseshoe theory in action, where some left-wing populists who did vote for Bernie Sanders, the more progressive option, the more extreme option, who may have voted for his right-wing, opponent, the more extreme right, in that general election. So, just to conclude, we have, just oftentimes seen the far left and the far right. Sometimes they may be more closer than we think politically. But that would be it for our presentation. Thank you all for listening.